Hey guys, this is Dave Marshall with the RC Air Marshal YouTube channel, and today we're going to be doing a build video on the Dynam Focke Wulf FW-190 Warbird, and this was sent to me for review and build by BitGo Hobby. So thank you, BitGo, for supporting the channel. We really do appreciate your support. Before we get started with the build, I do want to point out that I did run into several issues with this airplane. During the build video, we're just going to basically be going over the steps of the build guide, and then we'll come back to the studio view to discuss some of those issues. Make sure that you guys hit the subscribe button so you don't miss any more videos from the RC Air Marshal YouTube channel. We really do appreciate your support. Stay tuned for the build of the Dynam Focke Wulf FW-190. Alright guys, we're here today with the Dynam Focke Wulf, however you say it, FW-190. This is a, I believe it's 1270 millimeter, yep. 1270 millimeter EPO foam. We've got retracts. It does not have flaps though, so it is only a 5-channel airplane. Now, let's go ahead and get the box open now. Now this is my first Dynam model, so let's see what we got inside the box. This is just, you know, kind of cardboard that they have in here protecting everything. And we've got the fuselage here. So in this other box, we've got the...
Sorry, UPS.
The horizontal and vertical stabilizers inside this box. And again, it's a little different, you know, than what we're used to with like the E-Flight, Flightline, you know, Horizon Hobby and Motion RC stuff. The canopy's not already on the plane. They give you a separate canopy, a nice, decent pilot, a bunch of servo extensions, some super glue. Here's a couple of other tubes of super glue, a couple of tools, a big nylon nut it looks like, that may be to hold the wing assembly in. Here's our spinner, our small tail wheel assembly. It looks like the back of the seat for the canopy. We'll set that off to the side. And Dynam always gives you 2 propellers, so that's nice. Because I can almost assure you that I will break one of them. And in this box, I assume, is going to be our wing assemblies, because that is one thing I have not seen yet. And voila! Alright, there's nothing else in the box. So here are our 2 wing assemblies and our carbon rod. And our instructions. And at the bottom is our decal set.
Oh, cool.
Now, one thing that is kind of cool is if you, I don't know if you can see it in the light, but there's a camo pattern on the top. I mean, it's really subdued, but it's like a darker and a lighter gray, but, you know, depending on how you look at it, you can barely tell. So that's actually pretty cool.
Oh, there's over there too, on the end. Nice.
The assembly manual, all you've got here are these small pictures, but I'm sure that they're sufficient, so we'll go ahead and get started with the assembly. We're going to take that foam safe, you know, kind of gel CA that comes in these little tubes, and we've got some right along here and inside that little tongue, or inside the groove there where the tongue is going to go down in there. We're going to slide these back together and kind of let that glue spread out a little bit. Now that we've got that going, that foam tack is starting to set up. I'm going to drop the servo wires down here into this little hole and go ahead and set the wing onto the fuselage. You know, while I'm here, I'm going to go ahead and glue this in place as well. Now it has you, it recommends using this foam tack glue, and we'll go ahead and do that here as well. in the fuselage and let that glue set up. And we will come back here in a little bit once the glue is all dried and continue with the rest of the build. The next part of the assembly is to install Y connectors onto the ailerons and the retracts. The light wires do not need to have a Y connector put on them because there's a light controller that already has those leads. So our next part will be to install the wing assembly onto the fuselage. I've got all the wires routed through there now. Now, one of the other things that I did is I went ahead and glued all of the magnets down, and I put some tape tabs on the front and the back of the battery hatch cover that just make it easier to pull that up because it lifts straight up. It doesn't have like a latch or anything. We have everything pulled up through there where we want it. We'll go ahead and secure the wings to the fuselage using the supplied screws. And these nylon screws go into this black plastic insert here and bolt down into the fuselage. And up here there are two longer, I believe these are 20mm screws that secure the front of the wing. So we'll go ahead and get those inserted. Alright, so that feels good. Okay. So, what we want to do is take our wing navigation lights and plug those into our light controller, and those are going to go right here and right here. So on the light controller, the brown is the ground and red is your positive wire, and we'll just make sure those polarities match up when we plug in our lights.
What happens if the polarity doesn't match?
It just doesn't work.
It doesn't like spark or anything.
No. And on these two sides, so the other, the belly strobe on the bottom side of the fuselage, I already have plugged into the light controller. And there's two more outputs for flashing lights that are just unprotected. So we're going to take some electrical tape and wrap it around those to make sure that they don't short out against anything.
Shove that back into the fuselage.
Yep.
I learned a word. So I think that I'm going to try to put an airplane together and Dave is going to film it to see how far I can get by myself.
That'll be cool.
Yeah.
Uh-oh.
What happened?
Nothing.
Alright, so
Alright,
now...
so we've already done some testing. So, I know that that is our ailerons. So we've already got the throttle plugged in. That's our aileron. Our elevator is here.
Has our cat's name on it.
The rudder is here. Our gear is here.
And how do you know all this? You just...
I tested it with a servo tester.
Oh, okay. So there were no labels, so you tested it with a servo tester.
Right.
But I assume that if you have a label maker and you absolutely want to label these wires, that you could do that.
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely. And this is our light controller, and we're going to plug that into our aux 1, where we would normally put like our flaps, but because we don't have flaps, we're going to go ahead and use aux 1 there. I'll take
Oh, look how thick it is.
square of that Gorilla Tape
Peel the backing off.
and put it on the bottom of the receiver. And we'll peel the backing up. We're going to go ahead and stick the receiver right here in the back of the little battery tray. And just remember with these Admiral RX 600 SPs, you want the label facing up and the pins towards the back of the model, and this towards the front of the model, and that will orient the receiver in the proper orientation, you know, to kind of get everything moving in the right direction. Now, with these, we're going to want those opposed 90 degrees from each other, but we'll tape those up later. And at this point, we can go ahead and do a quick radio function test to make sure that everything works right. We'll just set the battery there. Ailerons are working, elevator's working, rudder's working, our tail wheel, our tiller is working. Let's test our gear. The landing gear is working. And you see we have a flat spot there on the wire that the tail wheel is made of. So we're going to slide that down into the tail wheel tiller assembly here. And then, like I said, I've got an M2 socket head cap screw, and we're going to use that to secure it. Tail wheel assembly is now good. Both the vertical stabilizer has two, extruded points that fit down. The front one fits down into the fuselage, and that rear extrusion point fits into a hole in the horizontal stabilizer. So remember, the gray is the top side of the horizontal stabilizer. So we'll go ahead and slide that over that extruded area on the vertical stabilizer, and then place the vertical stabilizer. Now, just forward of the rudder, we see like this little keyed area, another extruded point that fits down right here into the back of the fuselage, and this area fits right here. All right, so now that is good to go. It's very helpful here to have a magnetic screwdriver because the screws are recessed into the fuselage quite a bit. Yeah, look at all the glue on the screwdriver. So, you know, there's all kinds of glue and stuff.
That's hard to get off, too.
It is hard to get off. Look at those barbed areas. Put a couple drops there on the bottom. Push that in. To the rudder. And shoot it with a little kicker to hold it in place. For the elevator, it's got this top plate that you know, these come through and they the barbs catch onto that and secure that that control arm in place on the elevator. So now we can go ahead and continue with attaching the control rods. Now, what I'm going to do is go ahead and install the battery. So when I attach the control rods, I can make sure that they are mechanically aligned. That looks pretty good. I'm going to snap that down. There we go. So that should be our rudder. Good to go. And next we will work on the elevator. We'll go ahead and snap that one on. Alright, so now we've got our elevator function. So everything's looking good as far as control surface functionality. So now we just need to finish up the final touches. So for the propeller, what we want to do is we're gonna first put on our the back side of the spinner. That's gonna go on to the prop adapter. And there's two little plastic areas there that kind of slide into the prop adapter, and you want to make sure that that catches to keep that from spinning around on us. Now I've gone ahead and checked the balance of the propeller, and it's actually balanced really well. So the other thing we want to do is we want to get the spinner in place to how it's going to sit. So we make sure that the blades of our propeller are going to come out in the right direction, because the propeller is kind of cogged here on the inside. It's got like, you know, kind of teeth, and those made up to the base of the spinner. So when we put the propeller on, you know, the propeller does not spin around there on the base of the spinner. So we'll go ahead and install our propeller washer and the nut. And we'll use a wrench to kind of tighten that nut down. All right, so that's good to go. And then, you know, you also want to make sure that your little candy cane stripes there, that little swirl, is oriented properly. So there we go. Now the spinner is in place, and the spinner is secured with 3 Phillips head screws.
Spin it around. Huh. Pretty cute.
So now the spinner is installed on the airframe. Our guns are already on. So that looks like that's it. The only thing that would be left is, you know, making sure that all of our control surfaces are calibrated right. But that is it for the overall assembly. All right, so there is the build video of the Dynam Focke Wulf FW-190. Before I get into the issues that I mentioned in the beginning of the video, I wanted to, you know, just point out something very quick. That Dynam models, you know, and you'll hear me say this, and you'll hear a lot of other folks echo this sentiment. Dynam models are a modeler's airplane. If you understand what you're getting into when you buy a Dynam model, I think that you can do great. You can end up with an excellent flying model that you'll enjoy for years. You know, but if the expectation is that you're going to get a model that you don't have to do anything to, that you just slap it together and take it to the field and fly, you know, the Dynams may not be the model for you. But if you're willing to put in a little bit of work and a little bit of effort, then, you know, the reward is a great flying airplane for a very good price. Now, that's also something that that is worth keeping in mind, is that these are priced at a price point where, you know, Dynam as a company, I don't think would be able to sell them at the price point if these issues weren't there. And they're not all issues. Some of these are legitimate cost-saving measures where they pass some of that work on to the end customer. And, you know, some of them are issues in workmanship where, you know, maybe they don't have as many people touching the plane along the way. You know, so they end up with, you know, with some quality control issues along the way. And I think that this, you know, Focke Wulf FW-190 has a little bit of combination of both of those things. So I'm going to go ahead and grab the airplane, and we're going to talk about the issues that I saw with the FW-190. And let's go ahead and get to it. All right. So I've got the Dynam Focke Wulf FW-190 here, and I wanted to go over kind of the list of things that I have observed with this airplane and share them with you guys so you guys know what to expect, right? So one of the first things that I noticed when I took this, the Focke Wulf out of the box, and I think you can see it right here, where the glue, or where the 2 halves of the fuselage. So if you guys didn't know, most foam airplane fuselages are built in 2 halves. They aren't built as one piece. And typically what I've seen with other companies is they will glue the 2 halves together and then either use some type of filler or whatever to fill in that area where those 2 halves are glued together, and do some prep work before they paint the model. With the Dynams, it looks like they paint and then they press the two halves together. Possibly, you know, it's a little easier to do that, or they saved, you know, some money painting all the foam pieces, you know, as soon as they're coming out of the molds, rather than taking them out of the molds, putting it together, sanding, filling, doing whatever, and then going back and painting the model. So that was a little bit, little different than what I've seen in the past. So just understand, you know, that you may have some gaps, and you're going to be able to see that seam, like you see right there on the turtle deck, just after the canopy. The other thing that I found is the motor, and unfortunately you're not going to be able to really see it here, unless I was to, you know, to pull the cowling off. And you know, now that I've got the, you know, the prop and everything mounted on there, I don't really want to mess with that. But the motor has some very thin wires going out to the speed control. So that was something that I, you know, have not seen in the past. On motors of comparable size, they usually have, you know, probably like a 14 or 12 gauge wire coming out of the motor. And I'd say on the Dynams, you know, they're probably closer to like a 20 gauge or 18 gauge wire. They're very thin. And my concern there is that for the amount of current that we're running into the motor, is that safe to have the wires being so thin? Time will tell. You know, I haven't seen a lot of people, you know, complaining about the motor wires on a Dynam model, you know, getting too hot, overheating, catching on fire, doing anything crazy like that. So, you know, it may not be an issue, but it was just something that I observed. Something else that was pretty crazy on this model, and I'm going to flip it around here so you guys can see the bottom of the wings, and hopefully you'll be able to see, you know, some of these areas that I'm talking about here. All right, so if you guys see, there's like a block of foam here, and there's other blocks as well, you know, on different areas. So there's another block like here, there's another block here, there's another block that goes along the wing. So rather than just having channels that are routed into the foam or molded into the foam where they can just stuff the servo wire, they've got these foam blocks, you know, so they install the electronics, and then they, you know, route the wires embedded into the wing, and then they glue these foam blocks on top of that in an effort to have a more seamless appearance, or to have a more, you know, where you can't see the servo wires. You know, one thing that I would tell you is I'd rather be able to see the servo wires than to deal with what I had to deal with. So I can't remember exactly which wing it was. I believe it may have been, yeah, I can't remember which one it was. It was this one, the one that we're looking at here. So on this wing, you know, like I said, all of your wires are routed under this block. So your retract wire, your servo wire, and your wire for your LED are all routed, you know, underneath this block, and then the servo and everything go under, you know, there's a small channel here, and then they go under this block out into the fuselage. Now, the problem is that this is also where your spar is. So there is a small molded section for the spar and another molded channel for the wiring underneath this foam block. The problem that I had with this particular wing was that the servo wires were going through the spar channel rather than the wiring channel, which required me to have to remove this full block. If I'd have just jammed the spar in there, I'd have cut the servo wires, and that would not have been a good day. So I had to you know, take like a pry bar, you know, and do modeling, quite a bit of it, to get this foam block out, separate the glue, get the foam out, route the wiring down the proper channel, glue that back in, tape it down, and in the process that ripped off all the paint. You may see in the video a portion of the video where this has all the paint stripped off and it looks really bad. And I just mixed up some paint with my airbrush and went through and repainted all of that area where now you can't tell, you know, the amount of work that I had to put into that. And, you know, while I was at it, I also painted the gear doors the same color, and I painted the bottoms of the servos as well. You can't really see because the big iron cross is sitting on top of them. But, you know, in the end, I think that it turned out great. So that was one of the areas where I had to put some work into it, was, you know, correcting that spot where the servo wires were running down the spar tube of the wing. Not good. The other thing, which is kind of weird, and for this one I was not going to fix it because I didn't notice until the airplane was already done. The navigation lights, the LEDs on the wingtips, are reversed. So your red LED is on the right side of the plane, and the green LED is on the left side of the plane. So the same thing with the foam blocks and the wiring. If I wanted to correct that issue, I'd have to pull this block out and pull that center block out again here, and take all of the wiring out and glue those blocks back in, tape them down, get them flush, and then have to repaint the whole bottom of the wing. I really don't want to mess with that, but apparently that's a pretty common problem with Dynam, is to have the navigation lights on the wingtips reversed. The underbelly light, the beacon, which is right here, that's our flashing beacon on the bottom of the model. That one works fine, so there's no problems there. Where else did we run into issues? Okay, so I had a lot of issues with the steering assembly for the tailwheel steering right here. And I'll just go ahead and start getting into what I had to deal with to make that work. Trying to get this out of the way so I can get this at a better vantage point here. All right. So this little assembly is like an aluminum hub assembly with a hole drilled through the middle and a like a grub screw to hold in you know, the wire that holds the tail wheel. So and that has a like a control horn on it. It's and runs via control rod through the chassis, through like a tube, and out to your rudder servo, where it's coupled onto the same control arm with the control rod for the rudder. So your rudder and your tail wheel assembly, it's two different control rods, both running off of the same servo. Now, when I was doing the servo testing for this particular model, the rudder servo would not move at all. It was seized up and I didn't know what was going on with it. I disconnected the tail wheel assembly and the rudder started moving just fine after that. So I knew at that point that the tail wheel assembly, that steering block, was seized up. I couldn't get it to loosen up by taking a wrench to it. I couldn't get it to loosen up by applying heat. I just couldn't figure out what was going on with it. And eventually what I had to do was I had to take the aft end of the model because there's no way to get that block out. So I had to take a hobby knife and basically cut open the fuselage and separate the two, so I had to take these two pieces of foam and separate them so the back of the model looked like a Y, and pull that assembly out and pull the control rod out, and there was glue all over that assembly, which was seizing it up and making it where it just couldn't turn without an extremely large amount of force, far more than than a servo can put out. I was able to clean that up by separating the aluminum from the plastic, and heating up the aluminum, melting off all of the glue and everything, getting that cleaned up and polished, and then I reassembled everything, put it back together. I had to hold this together with glue, so that whole area was also, all the paint was removed, and I ended up having to, basically take that apart, reassemble that tail assembly and put it all back together. So it was kind of a pain in the butt. All right, and after I got it all back together, and it could move fine, the control rods were no longer seized up. The problem that I ran into at that point was the hole that the tail wheel goes into was not drilled deep enough, so I had to drill the hole in the tearing assembly probably about a half an inch deeper than what it was already drilled, and I had to retap the set screw for that little aluminum piece. So that was probably more work than I really needed to do, and I probably should have taken BitGo up on their offer, but in the end, I'm pretty happy with the results. I would say that was the biggest challenge of this model, was getting that tail wheel assembly to turn free. Some other minor gripes that I've got is a lot of the cavities where you have to, put screws in, so you've got like screw holes here and here. And those screw holes, because of the way that the model is put together and the type of glue that they use, when the glue dries, it gets really gummy. When I was inserting the screws, I got glue all over my tools, all over my screwdriver, trying to, get that screw in place. When I backed the screwdriver out of that cavity, it just had glue strung all over it. So, something else to consider. And the last thing that I want to mention, actually two more things. The prop adapter, so now it's turning true. When I first installed the prop, I noticed that there was a bit of a wobble. Actually, I noticed it on the prop adapter when I was doing the motor testing. There was a bit of a wobble on the prop adapter, and I didn't understand why, because it looked like the motor was spinning true. And when I put the prop on, it was vibrating really bad. There was obviously an issue. So I took off the prop adapter. It's a bolt-on style prop adapter. I took the prop adapter off, and I did some measurements and some testing to try to see, if the prop adapter wasn't straight. It looked like the prop adapter was straight. But, one of the things that I noticed is that when I was removing the prop adapter, 3 of the 4 screws were tightened down pretty good, and one of them just wasn't tightened down at all. But I thought, like, hey, 3 of 4 screws, that should still hold it down pretty good. But needless to say, when I put the prop adapter back on, because I was like, let me see how it runs, if it runs true with all 4 screws tight. And it was great. You know, and now I've got no more wobble. Everything, you know, is fantastic on the model. So I don't really understand, like, well, I do. And I mean, what happened there was they just didn't tighten down all the screws on the prop adapter. And it had me concerned that there was a bigger issue than there really was. The last thing that I had to fix was inside the battery canopy, or the battery hatch cover. There are 4 magnets, or 4 metal plates, and there are magnets inside little like plastic housings. So you can see, yeah, you can see one like right here. There's 4 of those on each corner of the battery cover. And whenever I took the battery cover off for the first time, 3 of the 4 magnets came out with the cover, and I had to glue those back in. So, you know, at the end of the day, the model is fine. You know, I'm not going to say, like, don't go out and buy this. Just understand that you may have to put work into it. If you have a big problem like I did with the tail wheel assembly, you know, by all means, you know, take advantage of the fact that BitGo is going to stand behind you. If you've got a legitimate issue with a part, you know, let them help you when they can, but don't, you know, don't expect to get this and it be a super smooth build and that everything's going to be perfect either. There's going to be some things that you're going to have to do to make it the way that you want. Now, the other thing, and I'm not going to say that this was an issue with the model, it's just a cost-saving method that Dynam uses, is Dynam does not apply the decals for you. You've got to apply the decals yourself. So all of the decals that you see on this model, they were applied by me and Amy. She helped. You know, so all of your iron crosses, all your numbering, lettering, bureau numbers, the big eagle on the side, any decals, yeah, so your 2 crosses on the bottom. I mean, all of those decals you have to apply yourself, and that goes with any Dynam model. The decals are not applied at the factory. You have to do it yourself. So in some ways that makes it nice where you can customize the model and make it any way you want. And, you know, depending on the size of the decal, you know, like this thing, because of, you know, the compound curves and everything that were associated with it, this decal was kind of a pain in the butt. You know, and took a lot of, you know, stretching and pushing and stuff to get it right and not, you know, have a bunch of wrinkles and air bubbles under it. So that was a bit of a challenge. So I'll tell you, you know, don't listen to what the box says on a Dynam. If it says build level 3, you know, whatever the build level says, like add to. You know, unless it goes together perfect. Now, I'll tell you, kind of a sneak preview, I'll tell you, I've got a Dynam P47 here that went together fantastic, didn't have any issues at all. You know, so I think that it really depends on who built the model that day, you know, what kind of strange issues you're going to see. So, you know, just kind of keep all of that in mind when you're buying a Dynam model, and be ready, you know, to experience what may be a more challenging build, but what is, in my opinion, a more rewarding aircraft at the end of the build. So again, I'm sorry for the length of the video, but I needed to, you know, kind of talk about all of those problems, and that's all I got. So thank you guys so much for watching. Be sure to like, share, subscribe. Check the links in the description below for links on where to buy the Dynam Focke Wulf FW-190 and all of the different equipment that I've got in there. The Admiral receiver, the batteries we're going to be using are all going to be linked down in the description. If you guys have any questions, leave them down in the comments below, and we will see you guys later. Thanks for watching.